Donald Trump has effectively asked India to help run Gaza after the war ends. This is not just a diplomatic courtesy call, it is a seismic shift in the global world order. For decades, the West told New Delhi to stay out of the Middle East. Now Washington is begging us to step in. But does this serve our national interest, or are we walking into a trap? The mainstream media calls this a moment of prestige, but Indian strategists need to look at the hidden cost of cleaning up a mess that we did not create. To understand why this invitation has arrived on Prime Minister Modi's desk, we must first strip away the diplomatic pleasantries and look at the harsh reality of the Middle East today. The United States is tired. The American public has no appetite for another forever war, and Donald Trump, true to his doctrine of America first, wants to wash his hands of the daily management of conflicts. He does not want American soldiers standing on street corners in Gaza, and he certainly does not want American taxpayers funding the reconstruction of a city that might be destroyed again in 5 years. So he has invented the concept of a board of peace. This is essentially a corporate board for a bankrupt territory. The idea is to create a transitional authority that is neither Israeli nor the Palestinian Authority nor Hamas. It requires overseers who are trusted by all sides. And when you look at the map of the world, who is the only major power that talks to everyone? It is India. We have a strategic partnership with Israel. We have historic ties with the Arab world. We have maintained our support for the Palestinian cause, and we have a deep relationship with the United States. In the eyes of Washington, India is the perfect candidate to legitimize this new plan. But we must go back in time to understand the gravity of this shift. Historically, India followed a policy of safe distance. We supported the Palestinian cause vocally, but we kept our hands off the actual mechanics of the conflict. We let the Americans, the British, and the United Nations handle the so-called peace processes. We focused on our own neighborhood. But under the current government, that policy of hesitation has been replaced by a policy of multi-alignment. We are no longer just observers, we are stakeholders. Yet, there is a massive difference between doing business with the Middle East and governing a piece of it. The Trump proposal suggests that this board of peace would oversee security, reconstruction, and the eventual transition of power in Gaza. He has reportedly invited India alongside the United Arab Emirates and potentially other trusted Arab or European partners to sit on this board. Now look at the chessboard from the perspective of the White House. Why India? Why now? The first reason is credibility. The United Nations has lost the trust of the Israelis. Israel views the UN as a hostile territory. If the UN runs Gaza, Israel will likely refuse to cooperate. The Americans cannot run Gaza because it is seen as too biased towards Israel by the Arab street. European powers carry the baggage of colonialism. India, however, occupies a unique sweet spot. We are seen as a rising power representing the global south, yet we are a democracy that understands the threat of terrorism. When New Delhi speaks, Tel Aviv listens, and Ramallah listens. Trump needs that Indian credibility to sell this plan to the world. The second reason is the wallet. Reconstruction will cost billions. The Americans do not want to pay for it alone. They want the Gulf states, the Saudis and the Emirates to write the checks. But the Gulf states do not trust the current Palestinian leadership with their money. They want a neutral auditor. They want a competent manager. India brings that administrative weight. But here is where the domino effect becomes dangerous for us. If India accepts this seat on the board, we effectively become guarantors of security in the most volatile strip of land on earth. What happens if an insurgency rises against this board of peace? What happens if, God forbid, Indian personnel or observers are targeted? We have spent 70 years avoiding foreign entanglements that do not directly threaten our borders. Stepping into Gaza changes the DNA of Indian foreign policy. It moves us from being a passive moral voice to an active geopolitical player in a war zone. And consider the optics. The global south has been critical of Israel's actions in Gaza. India has managed to walk a tightrope, condemning terrorism while calling for civilian protection. If we join a board that is seen as an instrument of an American-imposed solution, do we lose our standing with the developing world? Do we look like a subcontractor for Western interests? That is the accusation our enemies in Beijing and Pakistan will immediately throw at us. But here is the aspect that most people are missing. This is not just about peace in Gaza. This is about the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. This is IMEC. Remember the grand plan announced at the G20, a trade route linking Indian ports to the UAE through Saudi Arabia into Jordan and Israel and finally to Europe. That entire project relies on stability in the Levant. The port of Haifa, which is now operated by an Indian conglomerate, is the critical exit point for this corridor. Gaza sits less than 100 kilometers away from that vital trade artery. If Gaza remains a black hole of terrorism and instability, the IMEC corridor cannot function. No investor will pour billions into a railway line that runs next to a war zone. By inviting India to the Board of Peace, Trump is essentially saying to Modi, "You have a stake in this trade route, so come and help us secure the real estate next door." This changes the calculus completely. It is no longer just about doing a favor for America. It is about securing our own economic future. If India wants to be a global manufacturing hub that rivals China, we need reliable supply chains to Europe. We cannot depend on the Suez Canal alone, and we certainly cannot depend on routes controlled by our adversaries. We need the Middle East corridor to work, and for it to work, the Gaza problem must be solved. So New Delhi is now faced with a dilemma. The heart says, stay away. The head says, we must protect our interests. Furthermore, look at the China factor. Beijing has been aggressively trying to position itself as the new peacemaker in the Middle East. It was China that brokered the deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. China recently hosted various Palestinian factions trying to unite them. China wants to show the world that the American era is over and the Chinese era of mediation has begun. If India refuses this seat at the table, who fills the vacuum? Does the US turn to Turkey? Do they eventually let the Chinese influence creep in through the back door? If India wants to be the leader of the global south, we cannot just complain about the international order. We have to help shape it. Participating in this Board of Peace would be a definitive statement that India has arrived as a major security provider, not just a market for weapons. But we must look at the details of the Trump plan with extreme caution. The reports suggest this board would oversee the transition. But who provides the muscle? Who provides the boots on the ground? Trump has suggested that American troops will not be there. Is there an expectation, spoken or unspoken, that the board members will provide peacekeeping forces? India has a proud history of UN peacekeeping. We have shed blood in Africa and the Middle East under the blue flag of the United Nations. But this Board of Peace at the moment is a coalition of the willing. It is outside the UN framework. Sending Indian troops or even police forces to Gaza under an American-led initiative would be political suicide for any Indian government. It would be seen as fighting someone else's war. Therefore, New Delhi's response will likely be incredibly nuanced. We might say yes to the board, but no to the boots. We might offer technical expertise. We might offer to oversee the reconstruction funds. We might offer to help set up the civil administration, relying on our vast experience in running elections and managing diverse populations. We can offer our digital public infrastructure, our UPI stack, to help get aid directly to the people of Gaza without it being diverted by terror groups. We can be the brains of the operation, but we cannot be the brawn. We must also consider our relationship with Iran. India has maintained good ties with Tehran even as we deepened ties with Washington. Iran backs Hamas. If India joins a board that is tasked with dismantling Hamas's remaining control, does that rupture our relationship with Iran? Does that threaten our access to the Chabahar port and our route to Central Asia? Trump may not care about India's connectivity to Central Asia, but Modi certainly does. This is the complexity of being a great power. Every move you make on one side of the board exposes a piece on the other side. In the next 6 months, as Trump prepares to take office and push this plan, the pressure on India will mount. We will see a flurry of diplomatic visits. The Americans will flatter us. They will call us the indispensable partner. They will promise us technology transfers and trade deals in exchange for our participation. But we must remember the lesson of history. Western powers often create borders and systems in the Middle East that fail within a decade and then they leave. India cannot pack up and leave. We are part of this region. The Arabian Sea connects us. 6 million Indians live and work in the Gulf. We cannot afford to be part of a failed experiment.
If this board of peace is a genuine effort to create a two-state solution or at least a stable autonomous Gaza, then India should participate. But if it is merely a facade to allow Israel to maintain indefinite security control while outsourcing the financial burden to others, then India must politely decline. New Delhi needs to ask for guarantees. We need a clear exit strategy. We need to know that this board has real teeth and is not just a rubber stamp for decisions made in Washington or Tel Aviv. And most importantly, we need the Arab world to be fully on board. India cannot be more eager than Egypt or Saudi Arabia. We should move in lockstep with our Arab partners. If the UAE and Saudi Arabia are willing to put their reputation on the line, then India can stand with them. But we cannot be the lone outlier. The world is watching. If Modi accepts, it signals that India is ready to play in the big leagues, accepting the risks that come with superpower status. It would be a projection of power that rivals the permanent members of the UN Security Council. It would silence the critics who say India punches below its weight.
But the graveyard of empires is littered with nations that thought they could fix the Middle East. As we watch this story unfold, the question for every Indian citizen is simple. Do you want your country to remain a cautious observer, safe but sidelined? Or are you ready to see India take the risks required to secure its vital interests and shape the global future? The invitation is on the table. The clock is ticking, and for the first time in history, the road to peace in the Middle East might just run through New Delhi.